What's going on, everybody? Austin Sylvie here of the Evening Sports page. I'm gonna go ahead and get right into it. Look, we just wrapped up Championship Saturday. A lot has happened this Saturday. Things that I thought would happen, things I didn't think would happen, and of course, big talk is college football playoff. Who gets the number 4 spot? First, go ahead and recap some of the scores from the weekend. Last night, Friday night, Southern Cal defeated Stanford 31-28 to improve to 11-2 on the season, and they have the Pac-12 championship. Clemson throttles Miami. Look, I put a score prediction out before the game. I said Clemson 35-10. I gave Miami too much credit. I said Miami would not be able to move the ball against Clemson's defense. There was no way they were going to be able to. It was going to take the defense forcing some defensive touchdowns and forcing turnovers. Clemson's defense is the one that actually forced the turnovers tonight, though. And Tigers win 38-3 to improve to 12-1. They won their third straight ACC championship. They will go to their third straight college football playoff. More than likely the number 1 seed. They'll play in New Orleans against the 4th seed, which we'll get to that discussion in a minute. Georgia beats Auburn 28-7. Big day from Jake Fromm, 16 of 22 passing, 183 yards, 2 touchdowns. DeAndre Swift was the leading rusher for 7 carries, 88 yards, and a touchdown. And Auburn, it kind of started like the last game they played in the Plains, where Georgia scored first, went up 7-0, and from then on out it was all Auburn. They end up winning 40-17. Well, Auburn gets first points, go up 7-0, and it was all Georgia from there. Obviously, Auburn was not able to do what they did at home. And Georgia, hey, look, I didn't think Georgia would be able to do that, win the conference, or I didn't think they'd get to this point. So congrats to Georgia. They may even be a year ahead, but they're about to be in the college football playoff, and Kirby Smart's second year as head coach. So a big win for them. They're SEC champions again, and that's great for Georgia. Look, you proved me wrong. Oklahoma, look, they throttled TCU 41-17. They're now 12-1 on the season, and they are Big 12 champions. They'll be in the playoff. Georgia and Oklahoma, I'm sure some people will try to argue that Georgia be the number 2 seed, but Oklahoma's already at number 3. They won convincingly. And I don't see how you could put Georgia ahead of them at this point. I think Oklahoma would be 2, Georgia 3. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's just who gets to wear their home uniforms in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl for the playoff game. Ohio State beat Wisconsin. This is the big one, folks, because obviously, look, last week's rankings, they went like this. You had Clemson number 1, Auburn number 2, Oklahoma 3, Wisconsin 4, Alabama 5, Georgia 6, Miami 7, Ohio State 8. And out of those 8 there, and then of course you had Southern Cal at 10, behind Penn State at 9. But of those 8, every one of those teams were playing in a conference championship today except Alabama. Now Alabama came in at number 5, just on the outside looking in, and it matters because if TCU, who was at number 11 when they played Oklahoma today, if they were to upset somehow Oklahoma, I don't think they would have been able to jump high enough from that 11th spot, especially with Southern Cal at number 10 winning their conference as well. TCU wouldn't have been able to jump that high to get into the playoff. Therefore, you're going to have Oklahoma drop out. And so at that point, even if Ohio State does beat Wisconsin, who was number 4, and Ohio State number 8 with 2 losses, Ohio State would get in because they're the conference champions and Oklahoma lost. But that still leaves open one playoff spot for who to jump in, none other than the favored Alabama Crimson Tide. But with Oklahoma winning, and winning convincingly, that to me that eliminated that spot. At that point, whether it was Ohio State or Wisconsin that won the Big Ten, the winner has to get into the playoffs. Look, I know Ohio State had bad losses, but all the time people are trying to argue, well, look at the wins they have. Look at who they beat. Look at how well they played. When you look at the eye test, to me, Ohio State and Alabama both are overrated, honestly. But I think Ohio State, honestly, is a better team this year still, even with that bad loss to Iowa and honestly, a bad home loss to Oklahoma earlier in the season as well. Look, Wisconsin wasn't a great team. They won the games they were supposed to. Everybody thought they could because their schedule was cupcake. But, I mean, they were able to compete in this game. That's a good Wisconsin team. And Ohio State, of course, has a ton of talent, as we all know. But when you look at Ohio State and Alabama side by side, neither schedule is impressive. The only real game Alabama played was Auburn, and they lost that game by 12. And honestly, it probably could have been more. They didn't look good that game. Jalen Hurts is not a quarterback that is going to go out and just win win big games, win the championship. Last year's team was different. I mean, you had guys on that defense that were generational players, and Jonathan Allen, Reuben Foster, Marlon Humphreys, Tim. I mean, you had generational players, and you lose basically all of them. And with the injuries they've had on defense, that defense has not been that good either. And look, they played one less game than all these conference champions have. They couldn't win their division, which means you don't play for a conference championship, and you can't be a conference champion. Look, Alabama know what they know what they had to do to get into the playoffs comfortably. When you look at their schedule, it's garbage until you get to Alabama or Auburn. And you could talk about LSU and Mississippi State and Florida State all you want. Look, Florida State, yes, they were number 3 at the beginning of the season, but obviously their quarterback going down should not have taken them from a national championship contender to a 6-6 team who had to schedule Louisiana Monroe on championship week just to get bowl eligible. Look, Florida State was not going to be a great team this year, whether we want to believe it or admit it or not. DeAndre Francois' loss was huge, yes, but James Blackman is not terrible. That offensive line is terrible. They couldn't block anybody to save their lives. Blackman got destroyed. Francois would have got destroyed too, and probably would, if he didn't get hurt Alabama game, he was going to get hurt at some point during the season more than likely because the offensive line is that bad. Defense never played up to its par that much. So honestly, I can't take that win into consideration. I don't care what you say. At A&M's not a great team. They won by 8, struggled most of that game. They beat the crappy Arkansas, Tennessees, and Ole Misses and Vanderbilts that they were supposed to beat. And then they play LSU at home, win by 14 and a struggle win. And that's not a great LSU team. That LSU team lost to Troy. And there's no transitive properties in college football, but I'm just saying. Then they go at Mississippi State, trail for most of that game, and it takes just a comeback in the last minute to end up winning. Mississippi State basically crapped the bed. And then, of course, you have Mercer at home. I shouldn't have even mentioned that. That was a waste of time. And then their one true test, their one chance to prove that, hey, they're still the Alabama that could compete for championships, and they lose. I don't care where the game's played. Everybody wants to say Alabama's one of the better teams. They have so much talent, and they're so great year in and year out. Well, they should be able to win that game then. And the fact is they didn't. Okay? They lost by 12, and they looked terrible that game. That is not a top 4 Alabama team. Why do we keep giving Alabama a pass every single year? Look, these past couple years, they deserve to be there. They were the better team these past 2 years. They were one of the best teams. But they're not this year. People think just because you recruit 4 and 5 stars, that even with all the injuries they get, that you could just throw 4 and 5 stars in there and everything's going to be the same. No, these guys are young still. They have to learn the system. They have to learn how to play correctly, where to look, where to be. This is not a top 4 Alabama team. And look, Ohio State had a bad loss at Iowa, yes, and a bad loss at home against Oklahoma, but they're a college football playoff team, so you can excuse that a little bit more. But regardless, they played one extra game. They played one more game than Alabama. They won their conference championship. And if you look at these two teams side by side, neither resume looks great. But you can say one thing about Ohio State that you cannot say about Alabama, and that is that they are conference champions and that they played one more game than Alabama had to play. Alabama should not benefit because they lost a game. They lost their last game. And they should not benefit because they didn't get to play for the conference championship because they lost. That makes no sense. I'm sick of these Bama apologists coming at me or just all over social media, all over TV, saying that Alabama's a better team. No, they're not. No, they're not. Jalen Hurts and JT Barrett are both good runners and good athletes, but they are not good quarterbacks. But the thing is, Ohio State did what Alabama could not. They won their conference championship, and they played for it. Alabama didn't do it. And if you want to throw the argument at me, well, that, Alabama's still a great team. They lost on the road to a good opportunity. Well, Auburn has 3 losses now. They lost their conference championship, but you know what? They played for it. And they beat them at home. It doesn't matter where it's played. You give me the best athletes on any given day, anywhere, and you should be able to win. Look at Clemson. Most of their wins this year, all their good wins, their ranked wins, basically every single one of them was on the road except Auburn at home. Those were the best games they played were on the road because they were the better team. Alabama is not a top 4 team this year, and because they didn't play for the conference championship, there is no way on God's green earth that they should get into this college football playoff. And look, I don't like Ohio State. I don't like what happened last year either. But this is not last year. This is a new year. This committee has said all year that they value the conference championship. They will give preference to conference champions. And they said, Kirby Hocutt came out this week when the rankings came out this past week after rivalry week, and they said, hold on. And he said that there is little separation between teams 5 through 8. Well, guess what? 5, Alabama, Ohio State 8, 5 through 8, they both fall into that category. And yeah, okay, Ohio State has one more loss. But you cannot sit here and argue all year, well, look who they beat, and then try to argue for another team, well, look who they lost to. Who did Alabama beat? Nobody. The one freaking good team they played was Auburn, and they lost by 12 and looked like crap. Ohio State lost 2 bad games. One to a playoff team, but one to an Iowa team they should not have lost to, especially by that much. No, I get that. But they won their conference championship. They have the same number of wins at this point. Ohio State's had to play one more game, and they won their conference championship. Alabama didn't have to do squat this week. They sat on their couches and had to watch Auburn get pounded by Georgia. They know what they had to do. They didn't do it. The college football playoff this year should be Clemson versus Ohio State in New Orleans, Oklahoma versus Georgia in Pasadena, and after that, I don't know because I'm not going to predict. But the top 4 should be Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, and Ohio State. USC has more of a case to get in than Alabama does at this point. I'm sick of Alabama always getting a pass, or Ohio State last year like they did. But I'm sick of Alabama getting passes just because they're Alabama. Screw Alabama. Screw the name. It's not about the name on the jersey. It's about the team they put on the field this year. Look, that's all I'm going to say about it. Alabama should not be in this year, and if they do, then I completely have no confidence in this committee anymore, and what they say is complete garbage and crap from here on out. Look, they said they value conference champions, they value who you beat in your resume, and they said there's no difference this week between 5 and 8, very little separation. And if that's the case, then you have to put Ohio State in over Alabama. The only way Alabama should have got in is if Oklahoma lost to TCU. That didn't happen. Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, Ohio State will play for the college football playoff. And that's it.